Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin here with the newly minted back from GameHole Con, Teos Abadia. Hey Teos,
It was
welcome back.
you too. It was great seeing you there. We saw all kinds of friends. We saw folks who support us and who listen to the show, and we saw people we look up to that are like amazing in the industry. And we were on panels and played games. It was lovely.
It was. It's always great to just be sort of walking down the hallway and have someone come up and say, sorry, I just want to say I love your podcast.
Mm.
And I'm always like, oh, who are you? Hey, but generally there's like traffic and can't stop, but
And every time it was
it
me,
just
right?
fills. Exactly. Exactly. No. Yeah, every time it was, hey, I love Teos's podcast. I'm glad you're there too.
That is not at all true.
But
No.
that but it's so cool because sometimes in this industry with any creative process, right? You're home alone, you maybe haven't played or run a game in weeks, and it's just like, oh, why am I doing this?
Mm-hmm.
And just to get out and know that people are listening to this show, know that people are playing your games, it means the world. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
thank you, not just the people who, support us on Patreon or who listen to the show, but thank you to all the players out there who just keep this hobby alive through just doing what you love, which is playing and running games.
Amen. Shawn, two fun things I want to mention. One is that there was a Kickstarter that didn't fund, that someone who listens to the show sent us info about, and they actually, had made it. And it's this. If I
Mhm.
can get that. Adventurers Compendium cards,
Okay.
and we had talked about it, so he sent me, a version that he made, and so it's this deck of cards. And if you look at it, it sort of explains how to play D&D from the first card on, right? Like there's a how to do it, and there's what's adventuring and encounters and the ability scores, and you go through all of them. And once you've done that and sort of learned the book via a deck of cards, you then actually can use them for various things at your table, like the condition cards or to remind yourself of how grappled works, anything like that. And I was really impressed with it. Really cool. So at some point, they're going to relaunch the Adventures Compendium cards, and that'll be cool when it comes out. The other cool thing,
Awesome.
the RPG from Free League, Vessen, it is available
Mhm.
free. I don't know for how long. It might be just like, it might be done by the time this podcast airs, but it's either a cautionary tale to watch those Halloween sales on drive-through, or maybe you can make it in time and download it for free. But that's really cool. I've been looking at that this morning, which is really neat.
Awesome. I will make a note to do that immediately after we stop recording. So thank you for letting us know. And let's get right to it. Let's get to our listener corner, taking questions, comments, thoughts, diatribes, rants, manifestos, etc. from our listeners. First, we get Scott Gregerson via our Patreon Discord. I'm hacking together classes and systems for a 5e game set in a near future setting. I'd like to have a little more robust social interaction system than standard 5e, and I was looking at putting together direct systems regarding a character's context, information they can gather, leads for them to follow, etc. We often talk about one character being the face of the party, and I thought maybe making these social systems into specific classes would make them feel less superfluous and more integral to the experience. And that's my question. Do you think assigning systematic features to various
Mm.
pillars of the game and loading those into classes increases the chance they're used, or does it tend to become more a series of mini games that only certain players around the table interact with and would alienate others? Great question. Teos, you have a little experience with this thanks to our Acquisitions Incorporated uh, book. So do you want to take a first crack at this question?
Sure, it's a fantastic question. I think where I think this can really work is at the table level. So at your table and at any one person's table, usually you find that people settle into roles. And so even if you have two charismatic characters, they'll kind of work it out so that one of them becomes the primary face of the party, if you will, and the other person sort of complements and may take on another role. But it sort of happens organically because somebody, you know, they don't want to intrude upon each other. Even if you have two rogues, you'll find one of them ends up being the trap rogue. The interesting thing is you don't know until that all starts happening. So there's the danger that if you try to do it in the system in the RPG beforehand, you can force things down a path that aren't meant to happen, sort of, if that makes sense. What we did in Acquisitions Incorporated is we thought about roles that were a little bit, they were somewhat things like the face, but it was more like the player who writes down all the notes, right? The player that's always interacting with the quest givers, the player who keeps track of all the treasure. Those are roles that very naturally end up being split up, and you see those really kind of happen again at every table. And so we could give these roles to characters at the beginning because they kind of were a type of player more than a type of character. And so it was a little easier to say up front, there's going to be a little bit of a, and it wasn't really a system, right? But it was features for those. I don't know. What do you think, Shawn?
I think that what you're describing is great to do for a certain type of campaign. And maybe that is a type of campaign that this near future setting would be. The question at its core, though, for me, goes back to 5e is a system which is there to do one thing, and it's to see how fast you can get rid of your enemy's hit points before they get rid of yours. And so the classes, the subclasses, even the backgrounds work toward that thing. They give you the tools to either take away creatures' hit points or keep creatures from taking away your hit points. Mm-hmm. Is that very reductionist? Absolutely. Does more go into a D&D game, into a D&D campaign than that? Absolutely. But at its core, that's what the game is.
Yeah.
So in order to make a system that works outside of combat with role-playing, with exploration, then you need to change the chassis of the game. So either the role-playing and the exploration are taking away hit points or keeping things from taking away your hit points, or in some way making a system that taking away of hit points is rivaled by the thing that you are creating.
What if you,
in order to do that, you need to make a system that is just as robust as the 5e combat system, because otherwise people are always, even if they're inexperienced players, they still understand that after a while, I am keeping track of my hit points more than I'm keeping track of anything else. The game master is keeping track of hit points more than they're keeping track of anything else. That's the important thing in this game, and the things I do must move in that direction.
What if you did something like, because it is near future, so you'd say if the premise of the game is you're on a team, teams have these roles. So as part of character creation, choose these roles, right? And then you'd get those subsystems via whatever that role structure is. So that you are forcing at the beginning to say, hey, everybody during character creation as a team, choose your team roles. Now you're going to get this package of benefits, whatever it is, that drives those kinds of play. I suspect that could kind of work, right? So that if you're like, I'm the driver, the pilot, whatever, I'm the gear person, gear master, equipment master, I'm the team lead, I'm the whatever, and you gave people some features like that, it could happen, right? Like team lead could have warlord type benefits, right? You take a move action now, that kind of stuff.
You totally could. I mean, what you're describing to me is something you could do with backgrounds. And so you can totally do that. The question I fear, though, is Scott is talking about classes. like making a class that is specific
Yeah.
to role playing, and that's where you have to strike that balance of what does your game do
Yeah.
and what's the goal of the players. So you could totally do what you're saying. You could say, well, you're a barbarian, but you're also the blank,
Yeah.
right? You are the intimidator.
Right. But if
You
you
are
say,
the persuader.
yeah,
You
if you
are the
say you're the
deceiver.
barbarian, therefore you have to be the equipment specialist. And so I'm going to remove some of your features and give you equipment features. Then that does, I think that's a problem. That's hard. So it's
Right.
almost like you have to be talking
Right.
about adding things, and you have to wonder whether classes really line up with whatever you're adding. And I mean, I think
Yeah.
we're agreeing. Like I would tend to think the class is not the
Mhm.
place to put it. And instead it should be something like what we did with Ack Inc., where there are roles or something additional that you can add on to it to reflect that campaign setting would probably work best, I would think.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So the answer is
Hmm.
yes, you could do it, but you would have to create your own system, and it would probably take 2 years of design and then 2 years of role playing to get it right. Or you can make an additive system that we're talking about, and it's still not going to be perfect, but at least you are not taking anything away from anyone, and you're giving them things that will hopefully be useful within the milieu of the game that you're running.
Hmm.
So
Fun.
I hope that helps. Next, via Mastodon, we have a question from PhD20. Do skill lists like 5e limit player creativity? Does a player basing actions off of that list lead to rewarding gameplay more often than not? Or does removing the list of skills encourage more creativity? Or do you think it introduces more problems than it's attempting to solve? In my experience, the answer is the boring but accurate. It depends. But I'd really love to hear your thoughts regardless. Thanks for the show. PhD20, PhD20, it depends. Sorry, but yeah, it depends. Uh, Rules like skills give ideas to players. Players might sometimes need those ideas. They can also be an indicator of what a player or character is good at. And it's important in 5e that characters do the things they're good at, because 5e does not reward failure. The story doesn't move forward on failure a lot. It usually only moves forward on success. So you want the people doing the things that they're best at to keep the game and the story moving forward, as opposed to stalling as check after check after check fails. So it's good to have that skill list for that reason.
Hmm.
Now, the other side of it, I'm going to let Teos talk about.
Well, what came to mind for me, Shawn, was that there's recently been discussion on our Discord about things like Apocalypse World and saying that, sometimes moves can be pretty confining. And yet we think of Apocalypse World as sort of, open play and do what you want. There isn't even an initiative order, right? You can just do the things that you would do because this is what your character is about. But even that can be confining. And I was also thinking about my experience playing Symbaroum and, no, it wasn't Symbaroum. I was playing a Mork Borg at GameHole. And it has what I guess you could sort of consider skills, but they're almost like proficiency slash ability areas. Yeah, they're and they had names that were sort of generic enough that I didn't feel like I or other people at the table really even knew what they meant. Like we could categorize things, but they didn't really tell me what to do with my character. And so it would just be something that I would be saying what I wanted to do. And then the DM would say, oh, yeah, use this thing for it and roll against that. And I'd often find, oh, I'm -2 or something like that. And I would just roll and hope I rolled high. And that was interesting to me because it really, I felt like in a lot of ways the answer is yes. Skill lists actually are helpful. Um, and because they help me think about the things that I want to do a little more, but also no, because then they confine it, right? I do think it's not just even it depends. I would say like it's a bit of both at the same time, and you're
Right.
trying to. I think you really hit on something when you talked about what else the system is doing. And this sort of pass fail reality of D&D, skill lists are really helpful for that, to help you understand what you're good at and what you should be leaning towards, not just based on who you are, but based on the game itself. And the skill list ties into all kinds of other things. It's how the DM adjudicates and the types of challenges they present and all these kinds of things.
Mhm.
So skills do all of this stuff for the game. And they have done really since third edition. So I think that you
Yep.
can remove skill lists, but it may not quite solve the problem you want. And it's hard to make it really solve the problem that you want to solve around creating open play. I think instead, what I would tend to do, Shawn, is fix how adventures are written and how situations are presented.
Mhm.
And I find that the whole concept of you can do anything you want really has to do with presenting interesting, engaging challenges where everybody wants to engage with them with creative ways because of the nature of that problem. And then people really do off the wall things in D&D, and the skill system is still there and is still doing its beneficial things.
Yeah. Two things come to mind. One thing, I'm sure if you've game mastered a lot, especially for a lot of different groups, you've run into this problem. You're role playing a situation, and one player begins to go down a line of questioning, whether it's trying to convince somebody of something or trying to discern the truth or something. And so you're role playing along, you're role playing along, you're role playing along, and finally you get to the point where you realize, okay, what they're trying to do is now calling for a check. And so you say, please make a persuasion check. And the player goes, oh, no, I didn't want you to ask for a persuasion check because I've got a -1 on my charisma and I'm not trained in persuasion. And so that's the conflict of this game we play,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
Is the thing that the rules do aren't always the thing that's best for your game.
Right.
The other thing that comes to mind is, and I say this quite a bit now, is one of the worst ways to sell a role-playing game in general, or 5e specifically, is to say you can do anything you want, because you're comparing it to board games and computer games where you're restricted by the rule system or by the AI of the computer. And so you say, well, you can do anything you want, but you really can't, or you really shouldn't do anything you want. So, you say that to the person playing the wizard for the first time, and they say, "Oh, okay." So you try to do this narrative play style where you don't worry about the rules. You try to get them into the role playing, which is fun. And so you go on and just do what you think your character would do, right? Okay. So you're role playing along, and all of a sudden combat starts, and the wizard says, "Well, I run up and hit it with my club."
Sure.
And you try to say, well, don't do that, because that, your strength is -1, and even if you hit, you'd only do 1d6 -1 damage. You want to cast firebolt because then you're +5
Yeah.
to hit and you're doing a d10 damage. uh so
Yeah.
the game wants you to do certain things, and that's what the rules are telling you, to do these things that you're good at,
Yeah.
so you it's that tension. It's the tension that I talk about all the time between the story that you're telling and the rules, what the rules
Yeah.
expect and want you to do. And if you can come up with a way that's foolproof to do that, and that's what Apocalypse World tries to do, right? It tries to be you're just telling the story, and if you just happen to do a thing that triggers a move, then you would roll to do the move.
Mhm.
But then people are like trying to turn the story toward the move, or they're telling a story and they're doing things that they actually don't want to roll, but they end up there anyway because the rules tell you you have to or should. So no game is perfect in that way.
Yeah.
And at least no role-playing game.
Yeah. I think one of the things I actually love about new editions and new games is seeing kind of how we endlessly try to fix this. And like, this sounds like a problem, but it's one of those problems that's kind of nice to have, because it leads us on this path of so many different games and so many different ways to try to get there, and that's fun to experience. So it's a good problem to have in the end, I think. If we didn't have this problem, life would be boring.
It's true. It's true. Last question. This comes to us via Merrick Blackman via our Discord, but via MT Black via Mastodon. So Merrick pushed us toward MT Black's Mastodon post. Folks complain about the 3-book format for new settings, and I get why, says MT. But if Ravnica or Theros had come with a 5 to 10 level adventure included, like Spelljammer and Dragonlance in 5e does, even at the loss of some of the lore, many more folks would still be playing those settings today. And you can agree or disagree with that statement depending on what you prefer in your products, what products and what content in those products speak to you the most. But I agree. I agree that adventures do more than just provide content for game masters. I think that's important. Providing something for game masters to run and players to play is high on the list of important things you need in a setting, but it provides more than that. They give a blueprint for the game master to create their own content. And so that's why I love this 3-book format that they've continued with for a few products now.
I'm still on the fence. I don't know how much I love it or not. I love it in principle, and I don't love it in a whole other set of ways. I don't love the real estate it takes up on my shelf. I find myself being not particularly enchanted by the monsters and don't really want that many and a whole book of them. I think I want that to just be somewhere, I think I prefer it being at the back of the book. I think the included adventures are a good idea. But some of these other things we're talking about, Theros had an adventure. Is it the best adventure to sell the setting? No. But it has a serviceable adventure that does talk through, does walk through some of the aspects of the setting. If it were much bigger, would it have made a huge difference for Theros? I'm not sure that it would. And one of the things that came up in this conversation was Van Richten's. Van Richten's has an adventure. It's actually really a very good adventure. It's just maybe more complex than the book has, but I doubt that that influenced sales. And at the bottom of this is that I don't understand the sales, right? So Spelljammer is selling really well, but people complain about it. And I'm not sure, in Theros is people talk about how amazing it is, but you don't hear many people talking about running it. And is it really just because of an adventure? I don't know that that's the key. I don't know.
I would say that there's a difference between a short adventure and a long campaign length, or longer than a one-night session adventure. I think if you stick a 1-shot or 2-shot adventure in the back of the book, that is enough of a blueprint, enough of a bit of content to really grab game masters. I think a longer, a 96-page adventure with several levels worth of content makes a difference. So I would differentiate those there.
Yeah, I don't know. I for sure, it was interesting. One of the things that we saw resounding agreement on in our panel at GameHole Con for Mastering Dungeons was folks saying, yeah, I like having an adventure included in a setting product, because even if I don't run it, I will use this as a blueprint. And so that was a very clear indicator. What that adventure has to look like, how big it has to be, how many levels it has to span, that's unclear. The 3-book format is a very interesting piece. I mean, it's a higher price point, and economics tells us that has to drive some people away, right? And sometimes things have to pan out over time. Like, maybe you buy Spelljammer and you buy Planescape, but how many of those higher price point things can you buy, right? You get to the deck of many things being $100. At some point, you've been plunking down $100 or near $100, 60 to 100 several times. And that's the equivalent of buying a lot of books separately, right? So you're paying for that 3-book format. And at some point you might conclude that, well, I wish I wasn't paying for the outer box of the slipcase and the DM screen and the
Mhm.
see.
Yeah, I agree, and I also know that, as we've said so many times, content's underpriced. Role playing game content's
Yeah.
underpriced. We've just
Oh yeah.
seen Paizo up their prices on all their existing and future products, and it had to happen. And I'm not. I'm with everyone else, right? There's going to be some things I just don't buy because of the price, but I'm not sad to see the industry start to catch up with the rest of the world in terms of how much this content is actually worth.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yep. Well, thank you everybody for those questions. You can send in your questions, via email, at our Discord, via YouTube, on all of the social media where we're at. We will take your question and run with it. So thank you. Now let's get on to our news and commentary section. And first, there is a delay with the Deck of Many Things. What happened here, Teos?
Ooh, quality issues. It was set to release on November 14th at a premium price of $110, and early reviews talked about the cards having a number of issues. There's a band that secures the cards, and apparently it's so tight that when you remove it, you can damage the foil edge on the cards. The cards are not all of the same size, so you can take the deck that comes in your box and hold it, and you see like an up-down kind of pattern. And that makes it hard to shuffle them. It's not just a visual thing, but a functional thing. They don't shuffle evenly. The cards are often curved, some convex and some concave, so they don't lay flat very well and can sort of feel different between the various cards that come in a given set. And then there were cosmetic issues, creases, disfigured edges, variance in how the cards were centered. So all of this came up in early reviews and led Kyle Brink to tell Polygon, quote, "We are going to be suspending the ship date until we can get to the bottom of this and remanufacture and redistribute copies that don't have these issues. The defect rate is too high. I cannot in good conscience ship this stock. We need to fully inspect it, understand exactly how many units are defective, all that." So it's clearly early in the process. Product has already moved out to partners to be sold through the distribution network, so you've got to recall all that. So who knows? They plan on still releasing all of the digital products on November 14th, but anything that's physical, probably they'll handle the pre-orders first, and then they'll go out to the distribution network again. Maybe they missed the important holiday sales season, and that would be really rough for something that's, a $100 product that might be that nice gift that someone gets the gamer in their lives. So that's a big deal.
Yeah. Yep. And good on them, I guess, for catching it in time and taking the steps that they did. I could, as much as I heard people complaining about it, I think we would hear more complaining if they didn't fix it. So
Yeah, it's impressive. I mean, you can argue that, well, I think most companies would have sold this. I've seen a number of cases in the past for board games, especially, but also RPGs, where the cards aren't particularly great quality, cards or tiles, and that's just the way it goes for that print run. Even within Wizards, there was the early version of Betrayal: The House of the Hill, where I have that version, and everything kind of you can't lay it flat easily on the
me
table.
too.
And they made another printing, but it was what it was. You didn't get your version back. And I've had games like Forbidden Island where I had to request replacement tiles because they were so scarred that you knew exactly which tile was which. These things happen. It's impressive that Wizards would take this step, and maybe ties into the whole OGL thing, right? Where they say we really can't take a further hit on how people perceive us, and so let's do the right thing and change it.
And that leads us directly into Hasbro's earnings report for quarter 3. Good. Is it good? Is it bad news, Teos? What do we have from Hasbro on quarter 3 earnings?
It's generally terrible news. I mean, the toy market has been soft, and everybody can take guesses just in terms of society as to why that is. You know, why aren't kids playing with toys and instead looking at their phones? I have no idea. Is it the phones? It could be the phones. But so there's already a difficult environment. Hasbro's already been trying to sort of turn down expectations, and then it ends up even worse. So they in Q3 they had a net revenue of 1.5 billion, which is a 10% drop. The operating profit is reported at minus 170 million, adjusted to positive 343 million. How do you play those games, you might ask? I don't get to do that with my income, but they do, because what they can do is say, well, hey, we sold E1, or actually are selling E1. And so they're putting the sale that is happening of E1 into this to say that actually they're positive. But you can only sell E1 once. So in reality, Hasbro has lost a lot of money this quarter, and that's despite a lot of cost cutting. And so I think that, from an analyst perspective, overall company, it's rough. Looking at the 9-month performance, so the whole year. Yeah, go ahead.
Uh-huh. No, I was going to say, is there any good news?
Well, and let me just say that they've lost 428 million if you look at the start of the year, so the 9 months here. So that is a problem. Good news, yes. D&D is up, yes, maybe, but it's really hard to figure out what that means. And I had some fun with one of the show listeners trying to go through the data, and we actually thought maybe at one point we could pinpoint what the value was for D&D RPG tabletop sales. But boy, they put everything in so many buckets that you can never quite compare the numbers. So the answer is not this quarter. All we know is they like to say that D&D is up. And this is something they've said kind of often, but not in the same language as before. Like before, they would say D&D tabletop is up. Now they just sort of say D&D. And what does D&D mean? Well, it's up greater than plus 100%. Because of Baldur's Gate 3. Sure. The Wizards of the Coast and digital gaming segment had 40% revenue growth behind the launch of Baldur's Gate 3, and to a lesser extent, an April launch of a Monopoly Go app. If you take out digital, then you end up with what they call franchise brands, and those grew 8% behind Magic the Gathering, D&D, Hasbro Gaming, and Transformers. You still can't separate out that D&D part. And even when there's a slide talking about Wizards Tabletop, which says it's up 14% for the quarter and 1% for the year, that also includes Magic the Gathering. There is some showing some. There's still some interesting tidbits. I mean, there's a slide that says that digital. Looking at digital, Baldur's Gate 3 is probably a big part of that plus 23% from digital gaming licenses. And so probably a huge part of all this Q3 growth. If you separate that out, Magic and D&D are only up 1% for the year. If you look at digital games separate from Baldur's Gate 3, so the non-licensed part, which includes Magic the Gathering Arena and D&D Beyond, that has 2% growth. So it's not like D&D Beyond is some, unbelievable rocket or something like that. And of course, Magic the Arena is powerful, so not a ton of growth there.
Right.
In raw figures, they say that tabletop gaming, including Magic the Gathering, is reported at 290.5 million for Q3. Digital and licensed gaming is 133 million. So, one interesting thing is on the D&D side, we've had all these product delays. If you look at July to September, the only thing that's in that is Phandelver, and then it's products that already have been printed before that are just sort of continuing to sell. So you'd think maybe Q4 would pick everything up for the D&D tabletop side. But as part of the Q&A, the CFO of Hasbro said, so D&D, I think it's down a tick in the fourth quarter. But maybe they just mean because Baldur's Gate 3 would slow. It's so hard to tell, Shawn. So Big picture, Hasbro needs answers. The things that Alta Fox said that we covered, many moons ago, where they argued that Wizards of the Coast is successful and Hasbro isn't, and Wizards is carrying Hasbro. I don't know that I fully agree, but boy, it sure looks that way financially. On the D&D side, it's doubtful that D&D publishing is seeing enormous growth. So what does that mean, right? Does Hasbro say, hey, make me more money somehow? Does Hasbro say, keep doing what you're doing and our focus is on digital? And in fact, we're no longer really putting our eye of Sauron on you. Have fun, make a great game. I don't know, but Hasbro overall needs answers, and the D&D growth is probably not coming from paper, and maybe not from D&D Beyond either. And that's interesting.
Well, we will definitely keep an eye. We have lots of links in the show notes about this, and we will keep an eye as we roll into 2024 to see what happens in those first 2 quarters before we likely will get the first publication of the 5e2e player's handbook.
I mean, and that's, if we don't see some quarter, Shawn, where they say, and the 2024 release, is resulted in tremendous growth, that'll be a warning sign, right?
Yep. Yes, it will. We go from the financial to the game-mantial. We saw a glimpse of what is coming from D&D at a GameHole Con panel that had a bunch of Wizards of the Coast employees on that panel. Dave Rogers on EN World covered this news from the WotC panel, so you can find that coverage on EN World. What did they talk about? They talked about the 2024 books. They kept talking about a surprise in the 5e DMG, and now they've announced that it will have a campaign setting, which we sort of thought maybe was the surprise. This is likely what that is. And during our 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide review, we thought, okay, this is likely what it's going to be, something like the Nentir Vale, maybe a return to a classic setting, maybe something brand new like the Nentir Vale. What do you think, or what did you note being said about that, Teos?
Yeah, I mean, I had to pat ourselves on the back a bit because it was fun that we kind of said, well, gee, if you look at the previous DMGs, what does the 4E one have that's great? Well, it has a setting, right? Like that's kind of what's missing. So I'm super curious what that will be, right? Do you go new? Do you recreate Nentir Vale? Which I doubt they would do. Do you go back to put Greyhawk in there as the 3rd edition sort of did a little bit? Yeah, I don't know. They also talked about often they repeated this concept as gateway to new players for the player's handbook and the DMG. So it's apparently a new player focus. I'd like to see how that plays out, right? So far, when I look at any previews, nothing in the Bastion system says to me as a great way to get new players to be invested, right? This looks to me how you get existing experienced players to be invested. Or if I look at all the class changes or any of that, to me, that all seems ways to encourage investment by those who are already in the network, right? So I'll be curious to see how that plays out. What else, Shawn?
Oh, they talked about new magic items to fill in rarity niches and more cool common items too. Finally, for 5th edition, a return to the 1980 cartoon series and the magic items that those characters had, which is something that Chris Perkins seemed oddly giddy about. And Teos notes in our show notes that there were 3rd edition versions of these items.
I think he even made the 3 versions for I might be wrong, but I feel like these were in the DVD of the cartoon series that he had designed them along with, I don't know, maybe Peter Lee or somebody like that. But I'd have to check my notes to be sure. They will do everything with this cartoon other than launch the cartoon. And it's the funniest thing because it's as we get older and older, like how many people have actually seen this cartoon? Like at some point you really need to go back to the thing, or you're doing a weird nostalgia to something most of your audience doesn't understand. So I'll enjoy seeing what they do with the magic bow and the lasso and the staff and the hat. But, at some point I want the cartoon for that next generation to enjoy.
Yeah. Yep. They also mentioned that the monster manual will have more high-level creatures. They noted things that they'll put in the stat blocks that were missing before, like the proficiency bonuses. So we hopefully or likely will see an update of the stat block moving more in line with the Monsters of the Multiverse book that was released recently.
Our Discord is often wondering, will the monsters themselves change, right? Like, it's one thing to have cosmetic things. Maybe they might move the CR to be higher up the way that you found it with MCDM products. But, are they going to make the monsters harder to compensate for how strong characters are? Maybe not.
We'll see. We'll see. And we will also see a new multiverse anthology coming out in 2024 that will revisit D&D's past. It looks like this will be an anthology along the lines of Radiant Citadel and Ghost of Saltmarsh and Tales from the Yawning Portal, except they will all be new adventures or likely be new adventures that sort of cover the breadth of D&D over the last 50 years. They shared a ton of images. Chris Perkins ran one of the adventures from this book, a Ravenloft focused adventure at GameHole Con. We saw the image of Ilwig's daughter, Drelsna, from that adventure. The sheep and wolves clothing monster from Barrier Peaks. They mentioned it maybe bringing in the Route of Seven Parts, as one does when one writes a long-term campaign to link adventures together. So that is something that I think. Well, I want to get your take on it first.
It's hard to say. Dave Rogers did a great job covering this for EN World, and sharing things during the con. But a lot of it was sort of his conjecture, and one of the things I'm really curious about is that Chris did say at one point the book had been announced, and there aren't many things announced for 2024. The one big thing that has been is this some sort of Vecna adventure, right? So maybe this is all. Maybe the Vecna adventure is a walk through all these things, which would be an interesting thing to do. I always make the joke, we will continue stripping Greyhawk for parts until morale improves. And maybe that's more of this, but or maybe it's a Greyhawk focused adventure, which a lot of these things, Sojkant is in Greyhawk, Barrier Peaks is in Greyhawk, so maybe this is all a romp through old Greyhawk. I don't know. It'd be very interesting to see. I'm super curious what they do, and what this anthology and or Vecna adventure ends up looking like.
Yep. And just to give the right credit, I think it's Dave Rosser, not Dave Rogers.
Rosser.
Yeah, it's okay. I was reading the notes and I realized that's not because Dave is a wonderful spokesperson for the industry. He does great work, and I just wanted to make sure we gave him the proper credit.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, and yep, and I will agree with you and say that if you're going to have a 50th anniversary product, this is the kind of product I want. I want something that harkens back to the entire game that's still useful moving forward, but me as an old timer can say, oh yeah, I remember that adventure. I remember that NPC. Oh, we had such fun playing this game, and now I can play it for a brand new generation of folks. So very excited to see that when it comes out. We had an update finally from the Adventurers League on their Yawning Portal website. Ma'at Crook provided an update to the service awards document that provides game masters with rewards for running games in the Adventurers League. Those rewards are generally giving your character that you play in the Adventurers League a benefit. The Liar's Night event is now available, providing Halloween-themed transformations that your characters can undertake. Not only can you become a werewolf once per session, you can become a were-jack-o'-lantern, a were-witch-bat, and a were-black cat. And of course, everyone's favorite, the were-candy corn. For sure, for that delicious waxiness.
That's a character concept right there.
It is. It totally is. And there are also adaptation guides that either have been released or will be released to run your Adventures League character through the Phandelver adventure and the Planescape adventure using AL rules.
Cool.
And all that is there for you on the yawningportal.dnd.wizards.com website. Any other news, Teos? Anything else you want to add?
That's the news, my friend.